Hello, and welcome everybody to another episode of Strickland. I'm your host, Shwin and Stacy. This is episode 261. I'm joined, as always, on it is a Victory Tuesday for both of us, albeit a bit bittersweet given the circumstances of the entire weekend.
I don't know
Stacey,
what you're talking about, man.
how are you doing?
I'm in a great mood.
Do you want to talk
I am
about
in a
Sunday?
great mood.
Or you get it?
No, I would rather not ever talk about. It's the dragon meme. So one dragon got bigger. The other one apparently just they turned the tide. So
They did turn the tide, yeah, we don't need to talk about it. Sunday's stupid. It doesn't count. It doesn't count. It doesn't matter.
no, they're the Phillies going up in flames. But I'll
well,
admit that.
can they actually? Are they behind now in the division, or are they tied with Dallas in the division?
They're not going to win. Everyone's saying rest the starters. They have collapsed that epically. It was a foregone conclusion they're going to win the division. That's what happens when you lose to Arizona. And
so does Dallas has the tiebreakers? Is that what it is?
Yeah, now because Philly shit the bed against NFC teams. So
yeah. All right. Well, the Bills actually do have the chance of winning the division. We got to win in Miami though, so we'll see what happens. But before we get started, I do have to make a few announcements. The first being that the Strickland has an Instagram. Check that out. That is at the Strickland on Instagram. Post all kinds of new content there. The Strickland also has merchandise, which you can find on our website at www.thestrick.land. We have all kinds of cool stuff on there, like this sweatshirt. Rest in peace. T-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, coffee mugs, water bottles, you name it, we've got it. The Strickland also has a YouTube channel where you may watch this podcast. If you are, you haven't done so already, please hit like and then subscribe to the channel. That'd be a huge help to us. The Strickland also has a Patreon, which you can subscribe to. There are a number of different tiers. There's a $6 tier that gets you access to Strickland, this podcast that I host every Friday with Prez. You also get access to Takes from Obvious Bozos, our newest podcast, hosted by Andrew Steele, aka Doug, along with Zach Blatter. That comes out every other week. You also get access to the Strickland Discord where the conversation never stops. There are further tiers. There is a $9 tier that gets you access to Strickland Roll, my solo pod where I rant and rave about the Knicks even more. You also get access to wonderful premium articles by Matthew Marino, one of the best in the business. And now you also get access to Strictly NFL, which you guessed it is our NFL podcast that is hosted by Constantine Metrikos and Jeffrey Rasmussen. There are further tiers. There's a $15 tier, $30 tier, $50 tier, and $100 tier. Those come with a variety of additional benefits, like pod recordings, merchandise discounts, and even potentially co-hosting a podcast alongside yours truly one day, whether you choose to subscribe or not. None of this would be possible without you. And none of this would be possible without BetOnline. All the major sports are in action this week. The college football playoffs are ready to kick off. BetOnline is your number one destination for all your sports wagering info, including news for pro football, the NBA, upcoming fights, and NHL games this season. Head to the website today to get into the action and see all the updated odds for the week. Remember to use promo code BLEAV, BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. So the Knicks did a thing since the last time we talked, a pretty big thing. They traded for OG Anunoby. Out goes RJ Barrett, out goes Emmanuel Quickley, and out goes the Detroit second-round pick that they owned, that they had the rights to this year. The Knicks still have 4 picks in this draft, so it is what it is. I think, like, just to start, when the trade first came out, I was obviously upset. I've talked about this plenty of times. He's like my favorite player on the team. He's one of my favorite Knicks of all time. I just think he's awesome. I think he's been undervalued and underutilized, and that is what it is. And I think that frustration of feeling like this player was undervalued and underutilized, and therefore we didn't maximize him both as a player while he was here, nor as an asset going out, can take away from judging the deal appropriately. And I think watching the Knicks yesterday was really, really helpful to kind of recalibrate and just kind of center, and honestly just moving past, like, okay, the guy's gone, this trade is done, and move past the emotion of it, and you just get back to like watching them play basketball. And the two things I'll say is, whatever my thoughts are about how the Knicks failed to quite maximize Emmanuel Quickley and valued him and blah, 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 it's worth mentioning that, like, they turned a kid they picked 25th in 2020 and turned him into a prototype 3-and-D wing that was coveted by not just them, but numerous teams around the league. That's not insignificant. That is the reward of drafting well and developing a player well, even if you didn't totally capitalize and capture his value. Okay, that needs to be said. The second part is, yes, is part of their motivation to do this trade. One, obviously, yes, not having to attach draft capital, but two, being able to move off of the RJ Barrett contract, which this front office itself handed out to him, and which had only kicked in 3 months ago when the season started. Yes, and that is not a credit to them, but what they do deserve credit for, and we've talked about this in evaluating past moves they've made, when they make mistakes, they don't wait around and try to justify them and desperately try to make it work. They're willing to pivot and they're willing to bite the bullet, accept the error, and move on. And I think they realized, now looking at it with the reporting that we saw all summer with interest in Paul George and Zach LaVine and OG Anunoby, who now is here, like, I think it's safe to say that they felt by the end of last season that RJ Barrett contract was a mistake and that they needed to convert him into a superior player at that position. OG seems to have been the guy that they have wanted all along, and now they got him. Now, it cost you Emmanuel Quickley, but again, the fact that Quickley was, it says something about what Quickley's value is, that Toronto was willing to eat the RJ Barrett contract. And look, people can say what they want. That's what they're doing. They're eating the RJ Barrett contract to take on Emmanuel Quickley. And that says something about how he was valued and like the job the Knicks, shout out to Walt Perrin and the entire draft staff and the development staff and honestly to Emmanuel Quickley himself, obviously, for how he came into New York, how he's developed, and the player he's leaving as. And then the last part of it I will say is I have been pretty strongly dismissive of OG as the guy I would want to come in to replace RJ Barrett, because my gut feeling was the Knicks needed more firepower and they needed a third option that would be be a better version of the shot creator that RJ Barrett was. I still think the Knicks definitely need more shot creation. We'll talk about that for sure. But I think I hands up, ready to admit this, I think what I completely undervalued and underestimated is how much balance he gives that starting lineup in terms of two-way balance, and also just how much he adds defensively, simply because, yes, obviously his own individual value as a high-end, one of the best big wing defenders in the league, and a versatile one at that, but how he helps slot other guys in that lineup into the appropriate roles. Like yesterday, you're watching that game and you're like, oh, this is what Dante DiVincenzo can do defensively. This is what he can provide that's valuable. And the other part that I think I completely underestimated, I don't really know if anybody had brought this up, but I definitely undervalued it, and I think it's super significant, is I thought Julius Randle had a really good defensive game yesterday. And I don't know that was because he was way more locked in than usual, but I think OG's ability to toggle between different matchups means Randle can kind of shift onto different guys that you didn't have the luxury of doing before. Like, we've watched games this year, right, where it's like, oh, Randle, be the best player offensively for us, and also just, defend Giannis or defend Tatum or defend whatever. It's a lot you're asking of him, and whether you think it's fair or unfair to put that on him, the fact that there's no other option you can really go to was significant, and I definitely underestimated that. So, watching them yesterday against one of the elite teams in the NBA based on their play this season, the Minnesota Timberwolves. By the way, Minnesota, they have 15 wins this year against teams with a record over 500. That's by far the best in the league. So this is probably the best win of the season for the Knicks. And just watching that was really eye-opening. And like I expected, I mean, I know I tweeted up even before we watched the game that like, yes, I think OG Anunoby is going to make the starters much better. And that was true. But I am still, I think we also saw the other part of what you sacrificed when you sent Emmanuel Quickley on the trade, which was, I think Brunson played 40 minutes. The 8 minutes he sat were fucking hideous. And that was, that's when Quickley would come in. And then because of that, you're kind of pushing Brunson's mint right to the limit. He's playing 40 minutes. And even some of those units, especially the one to start the fourth quarter, where, maybe you'd have Quickley and Brunson on the floor together, and we know how good those guys played off of each other. Not having that definitely hurt them. So I think you saw all of the really tangible, good benefits of what OG Anunoby brings to the table. And honestly, it's kind of nice to just not care about giving up Barrett in the deal because of immediately just being like, yeah, this is fantastic. Fucking awesome. And then you also saw, okay, but this is the area the Knicks need to make better. And maybe they think Deuce can do that and they'll give him time before the trade deadline to kind of get his feet wet and see if he can pick it up. But my inclination is they're going to need to dip into the trade market, and good for them. You have the Evan Fournier contract and you have all of your draft capital that you didn't even, I mean, they gave up 1 second-round pick in the entire deal. Like, they still have a lot of ammo and a lot of options to go out in the trade market and upgrade at that spot. So, I think it's fair to say that I still believe that Emmanuel Quickley was the best asset and will ultimately be the best player in the deal. But for the Knicks, I get this trade now in ways that I didn't fully grasp at the time. And I still think they sold low on Quick in the sense of not maximizing him as an asset. But I get why they did it. I feel better about it. And I don't think it's an unreasonable bet to say if they can upgrade that bench guard spot that I just mentioned, even if it's a guy that's 85% of Quick, so not as good as Quick, the aggregate upgrade of RJ to Anunoby, and then a bit of a downgrade from Quickley to say a Brogdon, a Clarkson, or whoever, on aggregate, the Knicks will be a better team at the end of that all than they would have been standing pat. So that's just my kind of overarching thoughts on it. And I guess an attempt at a bit of a mea culpa in terms of undervaluing what Anunoby brought to the table. And I think you were higher on Anunoby to begin with anyway than I was.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw the initial tweet, reading it line by line, I saw they traded for OG Anunoby. I'm like, and I saw RJ Barrett, and I was like, okay, that's an upgrade. Saw Quickley, and I was like, oh, that is a cost.
Did you start crying? Did your fiance have to like hold you? And
well, I told my 10-year-old daughter, and she was in tears. And then she went on the floor and started doing the swim move, and she said "Quickley and forever," which is it's a kind of
quick conda forever.
No, I think so. When I found out the draft compensation did not include it, I did not want this to be their all-in move. I think that's something you and I both agreed with, right? So it was Quickley and picks. You don't want it. So they have all their flexibility to make another move. They lost a big young piece. But I was high on the trade for a couple of things. I think that we've been, for the longest time, whether it was in the draft, whether it was in, in the trade market, we've always been saying, they need a star wing, right? That was always the thing. You have Brunson, you have Randall.
And in general, we've talked about this previously where it's like, it almost feels like they had a little bit of a blind spot to like, they didn't, because in the draft, right, they've gone, like when you like for example, it doesn't matter, right? Because Keel sucks. It's not a big deal. And that pick, I don't know if anybody after that pick has actually been good.
Kendall Brown and Josh Minnow,
right?
Who were like, and neither of them have done anything. And
but it's the idea of like, if you're going to take a flyer, why not take a flyer on a positional archetype that you actually don't have? Instead of Keels, you have like 15 of those dudes.
Yeah, just way better versions. But
yeah,
like. They and for what it's worth, I think it actually makes some sense because if you look at someone posted this, I think Prez shared on the Strickland, but if you look towards the late first round and early second round, a lot of these one and dones don't pan out. You'll have a guy like Jaden McDaniels, of course, But a lot of these guys don't pan out, right? Because if they're if they're getting drafted at that point for 6'7" long wingspan, like you need more than that, right? If it was just true that every six, and I think that's kind of a misconception some people have, where it's like, oh, it's Cam, he has ball skills and he's 6'8", he's just going to be great. And kudos to him, he's doing well in LA, but it doesn't always work. It's tough to find that guy. It's also why, like I was saying this, like you can't just lump all 3-and-D guys together, right? Like Hart is technically a 3-and-D guy, right? Buddy Hield is technically a 3-and-D guy, right? There's a difference in being an elite 3 guy and an elite and a passable defensive player, or an elite defender who's a solid 3-point shooter. So OG, like, yeah, he's in that archetype, but there is just the same way there is a difference between Colin Sexton and Steph Curry as a creator archetype. There is a difference between 3-and-D archetypes. There's a spectrum there. It may not be as wide and as impactful, but it exists. So that is one, that's one thing that OG is a pretty significant piece. He's as elite as it gets as a role player. Moving beyond that, so onto the Quickley part. I think that watching the game yesterday, I was like, we should not do this, obviously, but if we were to make a verdict on the trade based on one game, who was right? And I think everyone who had a comment was right in some way. People who said the bench is fucked now were right, to your point, right? People who said they lack secondary creation without even RJ's contributions, right? They were right. Brunson went 5 for 23. Randall really had to play really well, much better than he typically does.
I mean, he was an absolute superstar yesterday. That was an incredible performance. I think he didn't even have an assist yesterday. He had 6 turnovers, and I didn't give a fuck. Like it's just one of those things, right, where it's like if you just look at the box score, you'd be like, oh my god, 6 turnovers, no assists, must play like an asshole a little bit. But like he was just,
and he's had 6 or 7 assist games with 3 turnovers. And you're like, no, his decision making was fucking shit. You know?
Yeah, no, he was spectacular yesterday. He was so good.
This is up there with one of, I would say, especially given the opponent and the quality, one of his and just the process, one of his best performances as a Knick, if not the best. But you saw that. I think with Quickley, it comes down to this, right? And I was thinking about this. It's like he does a lot of things at a really high level. He checks pretty much every box, right? He can shoot, he can create his own shot. He's very efficient out of the pick and roll. He's a very good help defender, and he seems to make every lineup he's in better. The Knicks' calculus, I think, is that for what they need from that position, right? Kind of the backup point guard and Moonlight as the 2 guard next to Brunson. For that, he is overqualified. And here's the thing, right? I don't want to use the word luxury, but the fact that this guy can come in and just start and average 20 points a game when Brunson is hurt is awesome. It is. The Knicks would take that as a bonus, though, when you're talking about contracts. There are other teams, including Toronto, who would say, Quickley would say, look, there are teams who will pay for those skills like they're not a bonus, like they're a necessity. They will give me $30 million. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets $30 million a year. And the Knicks ultimately figured that now that you've paid Hart, you've paid Barrett, if that's how you're going to move forward, you have an overqualified guy there, and now you have a guy on the wing who's frankly not getting it done. Do I think RJ will be a good player? Yes. I think up-tempo offense that can get him in transition. He had a nice debut in Toronto. I think he'll continue to improve as a defender. I think he's going to be a nice player. I don't think it will be enough in that position to elevate the Knicks because they need that. So you're talking about kind of because they have to pay Brunson the year after. So then you're probably investing something like $70 million a year in a backcourt. Add in Randall. Randall's going to re-up too. So right, maybe another that gets you over 100 plus Hart. So even forgetting Randall, if you taking the Hart contract, you're giving about $90 million a year to 3 guys under 6'6". It's tough. And do I think it could have worked? Yeah. To your point, I think the fact that the Quickley Hart lineup was so good with Brunson and Randall was something worth exploring more.
Well, and I think this is where this is what actually annoys me about when I say like they didn't maximize Quickley as an asset. This is exactly what I mean. Where it's like, they traded Barrett out in this trade, right? So, like, clearly they didn't think Barrett was good because they're trading Barrett out to upgrade his spot and giving up Quickley. So they were comfortable moving on from Barrett. So if you're comfortable moving on from Barrett, why would you never try the lineup that kicked ass since you acquired Josh Hart? And honestly, forgetting just the Josh Hart piece of it, like that Quickley Brunson pairing was fucking nails the entire time. They were awesome together. So like, I just think that was such a mistake. And you can say like, well, I mean, you got OG. So what more could you want? Like, how much more could Quickley's value realistically have been?
Maybe we got a pick back.
Yeah, I think people are really, or maybe you just don't have to give up the pick, right? Like maybe you don't have to give up the pick. Maybe you get a couple seconds. Maybe you get a first. Who knows? But like, I think it's really ridiculous to think that a franchise that allowed Tom Thibodeau to start Elfrid Payton, Kemba Walker, Alec Burks, Deuce McBride for one game on New Year's Eve. Like just any and all players over Emmanuel Quickley for every step of his way actually maximize the asset. Like they did not maximize the asset. I don't think there's any way to deny that, or there's any way to argue they did. And that will annoy me forever because you're watching that game. I mean, that's what was so funny watching that game yesterday is because the entire time watching it, I'm like, man, this team with Anunoby, but you keep Quickley. I mean, they got a shot. Like they got a shot to make real fucking noise in the playoffs. And maybe they get a guy like Brogdon and Clarkson, and we're still sitting here saying, yeah, they got a shot to make noise in the playoffs. But I'm like watching that game yesterday. I'm like, dude, Quickley on this fucking team with Anunoby in place of Barrett is like you're kicking ass with that team.
And we talked about how he maximized DiVincenzo. Quickley, I will say, is underrated as a point of attack defender. Imagine Quickley getting to fly around with OG at the point of attack.
Yeah.
Next. So
I think the final thing I'll say is if the Knicks had and I get, it's going to cost money because you're going to have to pay Quick and you're going to pay Anunoby and you got a Brunson extension, you got a Randall extension coming down the line. I really think if the Knicks had the chance to do this trade, but they had to give up, say, like 3 picks or something, 2 picks, 3 picks, whatever, instead of Quick, I really think it might have been worth it because I'm like, I just can't. I mean, the starters were like plus 25 or some shit yesterday. Anunoby was anyway. And then the bench was terrible. And I'm like, but what if you just did, like, if you just had the good bench and then you have the good starters now, like, what is that team? That team is a fucking beast. And you'd still have options to make trades down the line. So, I mean, look, I don't want to harp too much on like, oh my God, I miss Quick forever. But like, there is stuff about this trade where I'm just like, it's not even so much now about the value the Knicks gave up, which I think is honestly, I think even in real time, like, yeah, you want to call it a slight overpay. I think it is a slight overpay because you're giving up the pick, and that's fine.
The best player, probably.
Yeah, but you're also dumping the worst contract. It's a whatever. I think it's a slight overpay, but it's fine. So I wasn't really I was never really pissed about like what was given up in the trade. It's more just the like, man, it would have been so cool to see Quickley with this team because this team is, I think they're really close. I mean, and Mitch too, right? Mitch is obviously out with an injury, but like you think about, man, if Mitch was healthy and we kept Quick in this trade, what the fuck is this team? Like they're a monster. And that's definitely something to consider. Not just,
but their best player is under 6'5", so
yes,
can't be a 1A.
But like it is interesting to think about that. Maybe not so much as like in terms of regret, but more like what does that inform us of anything that we should think about as the Knicks move forward in building out this roster and adding more talent moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it hurts, it stings, especially beyond the fact that we loved Quickley. That what are we looking? We're talking about as the missing piece. Well, we need a guy who can. We can't have another defensive. Randall might elevate his game now. Maybe it's a thing that's going to be a thing now. And by the way, that's the kind of transformational impact OG can have that even a guy like Quickley couldn't. Right, because of his ability to do so much on defense, he can put guys in better roles. Quickley could clean up for a lot of other guys' mistakes, but just because of the size things, you're not going to guard. You're not going to put him on Giannis. And
to be fair, the Knicks, like even without Quick, like yes, he was their best team perimeter defender, if you want to say, but like they didn't have an Anunoby, right? So like so if you take out Quick and you put an Anunoby, you still have some pretty good perimeter defenders, right? Like Grimes, DiVincenzo. I don't think Hart's had a very good defensive season so far, but we know that he's capable of playing better defense.
And another guy who's better probably jumping passing lanes, doing the off-ball stuff than having to guard like Tatum or something, right? Or Anthony Edwards, as we saw.
And now, like, we'll see if Deuce capitalizes or not, but Deuce has a chance, and we know Deuce at the bare minimum is a quality defender. So, like, your perimeter defense maybe takes a hit a bit, but I think it's
a net positive. I mean, OG is a better.
Yes,
OG is. It's not like OG is not a good off-ball defender too, right?
He's just and who cares if he isn't? Like, the fact is you're getting him to unlock and kind of like allow these other guys that are better off-ball to do the off-ball shit.
Yeah, but it comes. The calculation they're making, to your point, is that getting the things that we're missing that Quickley provided is much easier to do than find that OG guy.
Yeah, and cheaper probably. Like we mean, what do you like? Malcolm Brogdon's going to cost you. Like he ran the Celtics 2 years ago, a late first and a bunch of shit. That's what they got him for. And like he was basically a throw-in the Drew Holiday trade, and you'll probably get like maybe you can probably get him for Fournier and a protected first at peak value. So like that's the calculation, right? You're like, okay, well, what's Brogdon? Is he like 85% of Quickley? You know, like, and
according to Michael Pena, he's more than that.
He's 103%.
And let's not show. I think the bigger concern with Brogdon is Quickley's been pretty much an Iron Man. I think he said this. Brogdon does have the injury concerns, but I mean, I was saying this. I thought Quickley was deserving. I don't think Brogdon wasn't deserving. The shooting numbers he put up last year were phenomenal. He really did have a great offensive season. He is not just a 3-and-D guy. He is a very, very, very good shooter. But so the calculation they make is it's easier to plug that hole, and the stuff that Quickley is going to get paid for is stuff that, again, maybe not a luxury, but it's more of a bonus here. Whereas for another team that really values him for that, like, you're our starting point guard. We don't have Jalen Brunson. It's a necessity. And that's the difference. And like, that's the thing. CJ McCollum, I think everyone talks about, I think Drew has mentioned this a bunch of times, right? Like they're recreating the Cavs. I think they can do a better job of that because they do have an elite wing defender. Randall's a much better player than Mobley on offense. I do think Mitch showed that he's better than Jared Allen. And I think that
Hartenstein's better than Jared Allen.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's consensus. But
he's he's number one in the league in the NBA today in defensive EPM.
Yeah, he's been pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
And then I think Brunson's a much better player than Garland, and that's assuming we make the Mitchell trade. But I thought about Portland, right? And now I think Quickley is not the same player as CJ. He's a much better defender. He's evolving into that kind of a player, especially when you see that mid-range game. Like I think that's another, I think, interesting comp. But the Portland had to pay CJ to be a secondary shot creator, which he's more than qualified for that. So it became tough. And then you can say, well, if CJ was Quickley level defender, would that have fixed them? I don't think so. They still needed that. They were rolling out guys like, Al-Farouq Aminu was a good player, but they're rolling out these guys where if they had that OG Anunoby, it might make a difference. But late career Robert Covington, they didn't have this kind of a guy. That would have been the thing that could have transformed them with Dame and even before when they had Aldridge, and they were never able to do that really because of the resources they invested in the backcourt. So it's from a roster construction standpoint, it's that calculus. It's just and that's the thing, right? Like you said, if you get 85% of Quickley or 80 or 75, right, you can have that role be adequate at least, right? If you get 75% of Anunoby, that's
not much.
Yeah, at that position, it just isn't. So that's the calculation they're making.
Yeah, just as an example, I don't think EPM is the end all be all just for what it's worth, but for this season, Brogdon ranks 89th percentile offensive EPM, 62nd defensive EPM. He's 87th percentile in all EPM. Quickley is 84th offensively, 60th defensively, 80th overall. The defensive number with him this year honestly makes no sense to me. I don't really get how that, why it's so low. But it's just an example of like Brogdon's good. And like it's fun. It was fun to shit on him in Boston, and I still stand by everything I said. Like, I think Quickley was definitely more vital to the Knicks. Quickley's a better player. He was a better player then. He's a better player today, and he will be a better player for the rest of their fucking lives. But like Brogdon is a solid player, and that, and I will say this too, like Quick obviously got a lot better in New York at dribble penetration and getting rim pressure and all that stuff.
There was no rim. That was not. It wasn't better. It's dividing by 0. There was no rim pressure when he was drafted, right?
Right. So the development he made is incredible in that sense. But like the Knicks also lost him. And say whatever you want about RJ Barrett. We do probably have to talk about RJ Barrett, which is kind of like says something that we've talked for 30 minutes, and the only things we've said about RJ Barrett is like, yeah, Anunoby's a lot better.
But did you see that Zach Lowe podcast?
I did.
So
we'll talk
there
about
was some sobering comments there.
Yeah. But like, say whatever you want about RJ Barrett, he did give the Knicks another guy that can get to the rim, right? What is he like? He's always been one of the high volume wing,
and that was always the reason to be high on him, because that's not easy to find, a guy who can just get 2 feet in the paint at will.
Yeah, and so I think like when you're thinking about what you need, yeah, we can sit here and talk about shooting numbers and EPM and splits and all this stuff, but like they don't have another guy that gets consistent rim pressure off the bounce now, other than Brunson. And Brogdon is good at that.
Randall can attack.
Yeah, that's that's different. That's like a different type of rim pressure. I don't think it's the same thing as being like a volume pick and roll player, pistol actions and stuff like that. And the Knicks don't have that now. And getting a guy like Brogdon gives you more. And I think they need that. I think very specifically they need dribble penetration. They need somebody that can collapse the defense. Otherwise, it's just going to be, there's too much on Brunson's plate. There's too much on Randall's plate as a result too. So that's something they need to address. I think they will do it. But yeah, I think like, watching that game yesterday, seeing how everything played out, I felt a lot better about just kind of like what, like assuming they make a move for the deadline, I think there's a pretty good chance this team is really, really good. And that doesn't mean
going down the Canyon of Heroes in June.
Yes. I was saying that somewhat facetiously. I mean, if they could get like fucking Devin Booker, sure, yeah, then we can book the parade right now. But
book the parade.
Yeah, but short of that, I don't think I realistically I find it hard to believe they'll be a championship contender this year. But like, don't let that be the enemy of like, you can be a lot better. And there is value if now you have Anunoby, and let's say you get a Brogdon or a Clarkson or something, and you get to the second round again. Like, obviously that's not the ultimate goal of where you want to get to, but it is like kind of it solidifies your status as a team that is on the cusp. That is,
and look, to stay in the same place, you have to get better, right? It's the Red Queen thing. Like, that is how the East, say what you want about Indiana, they are a threat now, right? Orlando is a legitimate threat. Cleveland is still there. Miami, it was funny. Kurt said this on the college football pod we did. Until you drive the stake through Bama, and that Miami is like that, right? Like, you have to drive the stake through them. They're always going to be around. So you have to keep getting better, and they got better as a team. I think today they're a better team.
See, I actually disagree. I think I don't. It's really complex to me, because I think I definitely underestimated. Like, I knew that RJ Barrett was killing them. I think I underestimated even like how much he was killing them based on yesterday's game.
I don't want to say, even if you don't want to take that negative a route, just how transformational a defender like that is.
Yeah.
That kind of versatility. And it opens up so many options that actually, to me, make this. You said this. You said this, right? Like, if Tibbs doesn't at least try OG next to Randall, he should be fired. I don't know if I'd go that far, but he has less. This is not Obi Toppin anymore. I think one thing I underrated was OG Anunoby's defensive rebounding, but he's a pretty good defense. Is it enough to hold up at the 4? No, but it's probably enough to hold up at the 4 better than Josh Hart did.
Well, the other thing too is, maybe he individually isn't good enough, but you would hope that between Randall, Hart, and then you throw DiVincenzo at the 2. That's enough. That should be at least okay. You're not going to be the all conquering rebounding version of the Knicks, but you might be like good enough. That
and again, if you have OG, Hart, DiVincenzo, and Randall at the 5, you don't have the rim protection. You may have to rely a little bit less now on offense. You're going to win those, right? Because now Brunson was unguardable 5 out in Dallas, right? If he's doing that with Julius Randle on the floor, and you put Randle Randle is very close to unstoppable as a 5 rolling off screens, right? So it gives them more cards in the deck to play. Now, the biggest criticism I think we've had of Tibbs is until his back is against the wall, he doesn't play enough cards. And now you're giving him the opportunity to show that the thing with Tibbs has always been get him some guys and then judge him. This isn't a championship quality roster, so why are we bickering about it? I think that excuse is gone because
the number one thing beyond excuse is always stupid too, because it has nothing to do with what the criticism is.
The thing they have gotten guys, not just OG, right, but Hart, DiVincenzo to a limited extent, right? Guys who can give you versatility, who can do multiple things, certainly on defense. You have to take advantage of that because, especially when you don't have the top end talent, because I think this team is damn close to contending. I did want to ask also, it seems like I'd probably agree that given the cost, I'd probably prefer Brogdon. I remember last time we podcasted, I asked you about DeJounte Murray just because his name had been coming up in trade rumors, and you were pretty adamant that you had no interest in that. I think after this trade, you were a little bit more
DeJounte.
Yeah,
I mean, I my thing with this is like, especially when you watch that game yesterday, like they're passing, they're moving, they're cutting. This is against the best defense in the league, like by quite a margin, the Timberwolves. And they're playing this brand and style of basketball that you're like, wow, this is so refreshing. This looks great. That starting lineup, now RJ Barrett's not there, so you don't have to like run these, designated pistol actions for him. All of a sudden, you've got DiVincenzo cutting and moving and OG playing off that. And it's nice. It's really good. And obviously, look, obviously we all love Mitch. And look, if there's, knock on wood, if we can get a miracle and he's back before the playoffs, that'd be fantastic. But like, Hartenstein being able to like pass adds to that, and you just get this collective group, and you're like, wow, this is awesome. And DeJounte in a vacuum is a superior offensive player to Dante DiVincenzo, to OG Anunoby, right? I get that. But you're not, like, basketball doesn't work in a vacuum. So if you take out, like, how are you taking DiVincenzo out of the starting lineup right now? The guy's shooting he's just shooting fucking fireballs out of his ass from 3 right now. Like, it's ridiculous how well he's shooting from 3. So you're going to bench him? You're not going to bench Anunoby because, you better not, since you traded for him and presumably you want to keep him. So, like, DeJounte's going to come off the bench? He's going to be cool with that? I have a hard time seeing that.
Well, I think that the idea would be he'd be an early sub, right? You'd get him partly to run that bench unit.
But I just don't see how a guy that, nothing about DeJounte Murray tells me he's a guy that would take a bench move positively. Even if you're like, no, don't worry, you're going to play. I think he's playing like 34 minutes a game right now.
I think they would bench DiVincenzo but just bring him in early at like the 6-minute mark. And he would still play a ton of minutes because DeJounte would have to back up. He would have to play all the Brunson backup minutes, right?
I don't know.
He probably is superior at that.
Oh, he might be, but I also know that you have to close games with DeJounte Murray. That is a case. Like, so now your starting lineup is basically set in stone. It's Brunson, it's DeJounte, it's Anunoby, it's Randall, it's Hartenstein. I don't love the spacing in that group. I don't love, I just don't think that. I don't think DeJounte is good enough to feel he needs to be a nailed on closer. And if you start fucking around with his minutes, I am positive that a Rich Paul client who already has issues with the New York Knicks front office will not take kindly to that. And then if you don't, okay, so now you're shafting DiVincenzo, you're shafting Quentin Grimes. You're like, I don't see it. Like, personally, the other part of this trade that I liked and what we saw yesterday is that it did give Quentin Grimes a little more opportunity. He played with a little more verve, a little more juice. I actually think he's been ticking up over the last few games also.
Really, since he moved to the bench, I think he's been playing a little bit more free.
I have a feeling that he kind of knew. I think they all knew something was coming pretty soon, and I don't think his improved effort in terms of like defensive rebounding and stuff like that is a total coincidence. And I just think like if you get DeJounte Murray, I think like Fred Katz had a report the day the trade went down, which was or the day after, on New Year's Eve. He had a report, and in it he mentioned that since the start of the season, there have been murmurs of locker room discontent, guys not happy about their touches, not happy about their role. Obviously, we also know that Quentin Grimes and Josh Hart publicly came out and themselves said they were not comfortable in their roles or whatever, all that stuff. And like and that was part of the motivation to get this deal done. Now, if that was a part of the motivation to get the deal done, I'm cool with that. If you trade for DeJounte Murray, I don't see how you can use that. Just does not logically make sense to me, because he's going to play a lot of minutes, and he's probably going to play at least 30 minutes a game. So you traded Quick and RJ, both who are averaging under 30, by the way. Quick was at 24, and RJ was at just under 29, I believe. And you're replacing them with Anunoby, who's going to play 30 plus, and DeJounte, who's probably going to play 30 plus. How does that? I don't see how that helps your roster crunch. The only thing you could possibly argue is like, no, Tibbs is going to play Randall at the 5 every game for a few minutes, and that'll naturally trickle down to the maybe. But I don't have any faith that. I mean, I wasn't surprised Tibbs didn't do it last game against Minnesota, because I wouldn't have done it. They're a big team. I don't think it's something that you do every night, but it is something that he should be doing much more frequently against teams that are not Minnesota. And do I 100% believe he's going to do that consistently against teams that are not Minnesota? No, I don't. And so for me, this trade is just like introduces all kinds of different issues, and I don't think we can ignore that anymore. It was obvious watching this team prior to this trade. I wouldn't say like anybody was like fucking pissed off at each other or guys were at each other's necks or something, but something had been off, right? Something seemed off throughout most of the season. And, I think we saw a lot of that. And I don't want to say get rectified yesterday, but we saw a lot of things yesterday that felt like good. Like the vibes were much better and guys are more involved and the ball's moving around and everybody's cutting and everybody's moving. And I really worry about like bringing in a guy like DeJounte, who's not even the most emotionally stable person, and kind of having to ask him to sacrifice. And then I don't know. It's just, and then you're also going to be asking other guys to sacrifice, where it's like they've already been sacrificing, Quentin Grimes. And specifically, he's a guy who has had his minutes and role cut drastically. And now you did this trade. Maybe there's an opportunity for him to get more, but now you're going to bring in DeJounte Murray, who's like, yeah, if you want to say, well, wouldn't that be the case of Brogdon? Sure, I think Brogdon's a little bit more easy to be like, listen, we're bringing off the bench. I don't think you have that with DeJounte. If you trade for him, he's starting. And we know how Tibbs does his rotations. At the bare minimum, he's starting the first 6 minutes of each half. And I don't really like that lineup that much, to be honest. I like the lineup I saw yesterday. That lineup makes sense. It complements each other. It flows. I don't know. I'm a little. I just. Do I think again? My point when I was kind of like not necessarily advocating for it, but what I was saying is I could see the argument for it. Is that I think the simple calculation is like the aggregate minutes of RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley is not as good as the aggregate minutes of OG Anunoby and DeJounte Murray, because I think RJ Barrett was just clearly the biggest negative on the team, and he was really detrimental. And I don't think that would be the case, even if I don't think DeJounte is as optimal as Quick. The fact that OG is there and that DeJounte is better than RJ for sure makes that a somewhat kind of basic calculation you can make. I just think it introduces other issues that are maybe not as tangible, but could prove costly down the line. Like if I'm Grimes and DeJounte Murray comes in and my minutes are cut again, I'm probably going to management this summer and being like, listen, get me the fuck out of here. And I would not want to trade Grimes in a package for DeJounte either. So to me, that's not a starter at all. So that's just where I come down on that at this point.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much the same thoughts. I think it's a little bit concerning that look. I think Brunson's a better player than Trae Young off ball, but it hasn't worked, right? I actually, when they got Murray, I thought this could be something, right? They have now another guy. You know, he was always a decent catch and shoot 3-point shooter in San Antonio, even though his overall efficiency was poor. You know, they have another ball handler for Trae. That's a lot of talent, and it hasn't worked out. And his defense has regressed. I think the injury has played a part in that. But even then, like the things that he's good at, he jumps passing lanes, which is a good thing. But his off ball rotations, like that's where the impact just hasn't been there in Atlanta. And you know, I think it's fair to say, well, the whole team is kind of a shit show. But if he's a good defender, he should be able to impact it a little bit. And it just hasn't been the case for 2 years in Atlanta. I don't also love the idea of taking the ball out of Brunson's hands for Murray, who is still an inefficient scorer. He's at 55.7 true shooting this year. That's a career high, and it's still below league average. I do think from the cutting standpoint, it's also a philosophical thing. Do you think the passing is kind of enhanced more by having more cutters and dedicated off-ball players than adding another? And I do think DeJounte is a quality passer. Than adding a guy like that who's going to probably slow things down a little bit, but is going to make better reads. That's a trade-off. I think Brogdon gives you a lot of that, though. And to your point, if it saves his Grimes and if he's cheaper, this is also a guy who's played on winning teams for most of his career. Say what you want about that. And you can also say Murray's played next to a top 25 player, a guy who averages close to 30 and 10. You can debate all you want about Trae's impact, but there's no debating that he's a very talented player. And so those are my concerns. And yeah, I don't love the fit at all with the starting lineup, to be honest. And I think if there's other guys out there, Clarkson has not been having a good year. But I think there's other options. And I'm interested to see what the Knicks do. I do agree with you that I think there will be a move, and that Brogdon one seems like pretty much a no-brainer at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing with Brogdon is, like DeJounte Murray, he's also a clutch client. And we know that apparently Leon Rose has to massage Rich Paul's ego to kind of...
what if he brings his son and Rich Paul's like, it wasn't long ago that you used to sit in the car. And as far as I'm concerned, you should still be there.
You ever lost anybody close to you, Anthony? Well, give it some time. Let's see if we can't make that happen. The great Phil Leotardo. All right, look, we've talked a lot about everything about this trade, but we have not talked about RJ Barrett, who's obviously a significant piece going out. Just to kind of sum up RJ Barrett's time in New York, obviously he's the third overall pick. He's the highest pick the Knicks have had since Patrick Ewing in 1980 something, 83, 84, whatever, pick in the year. And I think, look, his rookie year, he was not good, but he was also put in the worst situation possible. The spacing, everything was terrible about that team. And I thought he showed a lot of great composure and poise in those moments. And the end of his rookie year was actually really positive. Obviously got cut short because of COVID. His second year, he comes out and the finishing numbers are still pretty brutal. He shot 40% from three. And he was a good player that year. Like, he actually helped them win games, and the numbers bear it out. He was helped, and look, he was a big part of a team that was like the We Here season. It was a long time since the Knicks had done anything. That was Tibbs' first year. That was Leon's first year. And that team was really fun, and it was like unexpected, and they kind of brought some joy back to like people, and at least Knicks fans, in the sense of like during this miserable time in the world where it's like everybody's staying at home and it's all social distancing and everything, and he was a big part of that, and he was like represented some like real hope for the Knicks, right? He's a second year player, takes a leap. That dunk against Atlanta in game one was awesome, and like you just felt really good about him and his mentality and where he was going. Second year was a little bit stagnant. He takes on more usage. The efficiency drops, 3-ball drops, but you're still kind of bullish, right? Because you're like, okay, you got up to 20 points per game. Again, this is another shit show season where a lot of things were not great for him and the circumstances surrounding him.
You could see the balls dropping. So that was
yes.
From a development
yes. But like you still kind of felt good about it. They extend him. You're like, all right, wow, the Knicks haven't extended a first round guy since, fucking Charlie Ward. This is great. And then last year was a disaster for him, I thought, more or less. Like he never really got into it. Didn't look like he was in shape. And he made this weird excuse where he was like, oh, I couldn't work on the court all summer because I was negotiating my contract extension. It's like, oh, are you the first player in NBA history to work on a contract extension? So he just does not have a good season. The playoffs were better, and they were encouraging, but I still thought, and I think we talked about it over the summer, but like, I thought people went a little bit too far about what that playoff said about him as a player. Then he comes out this year, he starts the year, he's on fire from 3. After 7 games, he just can't make a shot, and he's terrible. And he's like truly one of the more destructive, maybe the most destructive high usage player in the league. And it was just getting to a point where it's like, it was just not tenable anymore. Like I think the fan base had just reached a point too, where it was like, look, man, like what's happening here? Like you're not good at finishing. You're not good at shooting. You don't pass very well. Like you got better free throw shooting. That's good. But there's nothing else that you've improved at here. And he also just has not looked athletic in a long time. Like he's never the biggest, like he's never the most explosive athlete, but I mean, I feel like his first and second year, you saw way more than what you're seeing now. And now it's all like, feels like he's moving so slow half the time. And I just don't get it. And like, it's frustrating. And I just think it reached a tipping point for us as fans and probably internally as well with teammates and coaches and staff members and stuff where you're just like, hey, like, we can't keep giving this guy the role and the usage he kind of commands because he was a 3rd overall pick. And I think he needed to go. I think he needed to leave New York because if he has a chance of becoming the best version of himself, I don't think it was ever happening here. I just don't. I think we've seen enough over the last couple of years that it just wasn't going to happen here. And hopefully going to Toronto, he goes back home. Maybe that is a good thing. I actually think it's not such a good thing to go back home for him. Not because I think he's like some fucking getting him like, not like that, but I just think like there's a lot of distractions when you go home. And like, it felt to me like, well, this is a guy who was drafted partially as high as he was because the idea was he's this psycho worker and he won't allow himself to fail. And I bought into that. I think, I don't know if you did, but like, that was just something that I felt pretty strongly about, especially after his first couple of years in the league. You see that 3-point shooting leap he makes. You're like, wow, like this is real. And I just think he hasn't necessarily had the same focus since then. He's lost his way a little bit in terms of maybe, I don't know if I think he probably works hard. I don't know if he works smart. I don't know if he works on the things that he really needs to work on. He's focused all the time. He's always talked about improving his shooting. But like, I think there's a lot more for him to improve upon than just shooting. His ball handling, his finishing at the rim, his decision making, and none of those have really come along at all. So maybe this is a wake up call or a kick in the ass or however you want to phrase it that he needed to kind of get him back and motivated and working on not just shooting and not just free throw shooting, but all of his game, all of it. And quite frankly, defensively, like I thought he started off this year very well defensively. And over the last couple of weeks, that's fallen off too, again. And it's just like when you're cratering like that as a player, it's, and you have the role he does, it is so hard. It's hard for anybody, but it's also probably hard for guys on the team. And again, like the locker room grumbling stuff that Katz is talking about, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Quentin Grimes is sitting there being like, wait, so I can get moved to the bench. I can have a minutes cut. I can have all these things happen. This guy can't make a fucking shot and he gets 30 minutes a night no matter what. Because why? Like, what is the reason for that? And I think that can grate on guys. And like, I don't know. I mean, look, Quickley got traded with him, so maybe that wasn't a gripe for Quickley, but like, we know Quickley wasn't happy at his minutes either. So, like when there's that much stuff going on, and then you have this guy who's playing 30 minutes a game, and who had, I think he had the second highest usage on the team, definitely third, if not that, just completely cratering for like a month on offense while he's not giving you much on defense. That's just gets to a point where enough is enough. And fortunately for the Knicks, they found a deal that worked for them and landed them a guy that clearly they've been after for a long time. I wish RJ Barrett the best. I don't really have I don't have animosity towards him, but definitely very disappointed in how it all worked out for him here. And I'm hoping that in Toronto he can get back on track and be the best player, the best version of himself that he can be at this point in his career.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we talk about so much. Here's the simple fact of it. Yesterday, OG had a couple of threes rim out. Every time he got the ball in the corner, you're like, oh, this is going in. That's how I felt. It's for the players too. It's like when we talk about Brunson or Randall maybe not trusting the pass, you got RJ in the corner, and it has always been a little bit of a more risky proposition. And the fact is, yeah, like we can talk about unless he really became Ben Simmons as a passer, he was going to need to be at minimum a reliable 3-point shooter. You'd also ideally
what would you say if I told you that passing shit comes real easy?
The passing, it clearly doesn't always, right? I don't love the fit in Toronto for him, to be quite frank. He's playing next to Barnes, who's a pretty ball dominant player. I think Schroeder's at this point in his career a little bit underrated. I think he's a pretty solid player. He's a good defender. He can play off ball. I think being in LA actually helped him with that. So if Toronto is willing to get creative with how they use RJ, he had a good first game. They get out in transition. They have some length, so he's not relied on maybe as much to play above the scheme. But that's what you have. Randall and Brunson. We can Randall might have it in him to be a pretty solid defender, but you're always going to need to surround those guys with guys who would not only just can do their jobs, but can do a little more than that. And that's what OG does. And that just wasn't happening here. And you can argue, why didn't it work out? I think there is some credence to the fact that, well, he's playing with Randall. That fit was never great. And now you add Brunson. So there's two lefties. I don't know how much stock you want to put in that, but they all kind of like to attack from the same spots. So you're not able to kind of shift and stress the defense as much from multiple angles. So maybe he'll be able to do that, right? And focus on his straight line drives and become a solid catch and shoot guy, get in transition. And, I think there's still a very, like, he'll have a career. This isn't Kevin Knox we're talking about. But here, for what this team needs from that position to maximize its potential, the options were to become just an otherworldly passer or really become a quality 3-point shooter and a defender who could add more than just doing his job. And it never happened. And I don't know that, I think he'll be a fine 3-point shooter in time. I don't know that he'll ever be like a super impactful defender. But, those guys find rules on teams, even championship teams, maybe with a little bit of a different roster construction than the Knicks. But I don't think it was going to happen here, to your point.
Yeah, and I just don't think, like, this happens all the time with high draft picks, right? Where it's like, when you get drafted somewhere, the expectations are like kind of are contingent on your, like, the circumstances of your arrival. So, for example, I mean, and obviously, I'm not trying to pile on here, but like, you're an Eagles fan. Like, they took Jalen Reagor number in whatever it was in the first round, and obviously he didn't work out as a pick, but it also was like made all the more frustrating by the fact that, like, Justin Jefferson goes after and whatever. But you're always held to that standard of like, well, you were a first round pick, and RJ Barrett was never going to be judged as like, well, he's a solid player. I think even if he was a solid player at some points, people would have just gone, it would be frustrating. You're like, well, why aren't you more? Third overall pick, why aren't you more? And like, you need to escape that. And and like we saw this with Wiggins, right? Wiggins was the number 1 pick overall, and Minnesota, he's always going to be judged the number 1 pick overall. He gets traded to the Warriors, and he's not expected to be the deliver as a number 1 pick. He's just expected to be a solid 2-way wing for them, and his usage and role were commensurate with that. And that changes so much for players, for him, for whatever. I think RJ Barrett needed to get out of New York because as long as he's here, he's always going to be judged as the number 3 pick, the guy that was the highest pick since Patrick Ewing, right? And I think he wanted that. He wanted everything that comes along with those expectations, the shots, the attention, all of that, the ballyhoo, as one might say. And he just wasn't good enough for it. Like he just wasn't. And I know that there are people that'll be like, well, the Knicks never put him in a position. They didn't prioritize him, blah, blah, blah. I just struggle with that because, I mean, sure, they didn't prioritize him. I agree at various points. But like, you have to also show, like, our frustration with Quickley, right, is that to us, he showed like he could be more of a priority for you as an organization, even within his more limited role. RJ never did that. And aside from his second year, really, he never did that. And that's what it is. Like, if you're not performing in the role that you're given to demonstrate that you deserve more, then you have to adapt. And I don't think he was ever going to adapt here. I mean, all the stuff that we were doing yesterday, OG cutting, all that shit, that RJ could have been doing that too. He didn't want to play like that, or he wasn't wired to play like that. It doesn't really matter which is which. That's just the reality of the situation. And that's fundamentally, to me, the type of player he needs to become to be playing in the NBA at a high level. Like, I don't see the 25 plus usage, shot creating, playmaking wing. One, because he doesn't play make enough. And two, he's not a good shooter or finisher or really any element of scoring aside from free throw shooting right now. So it's really tough. And the Knicks, I'm not going to say that they did a perfect job. It's hard for me to say in the Leon Rose era that they didn't give RJ a genuine chance. I think they gave him a better chance than they've given plenty of players, given the talent that's been brought in and how much better the roster is now versus what it was before Leon and Tibbs got here. So I don't know. I hope the best for him because I don't have any ill will towards him, but like it is disappointing. And it also I'm just not sure. I don't know that there is a very high ceiling for him unless he really kind of recalibrates his game and accepts being something that is a bit lesser than what I believe he envisions for himself.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know what that might be. I'm not a mind reader. I'm not inside his head. I do think there's also like, are we going to look back on this trade in 3 years and be like, oh my God, how could you sacrifice all of that to win now? You gave up on RJ Barrett? Like, there isn't a future in my mind where like, oh my God, like this is just, I've always said, I think he could be a 1 or 2 time All-Star. Particularly his 3-point shooting comes up to par, quality defender. And for All-Star games, let's face it, that's not really what they're going for. He can get points up in a hurry in a transition up-tempo offense. He has great rim pressure. So I think this is a guy who could end up being like a Wiggins type. I don't think people in Minnesota, right, are like, oh my God, we gave up on Andrew Wiggins and look how great he became. Maybe they are, right? I do think he can have that kind of career, and that's not to sneeze on anything. But I also think this isn't the kind of thing where with Porzingis, when we traded him, we were like, this guy could end up being a multi-time All-Star, right? Or a 5-time All-NBA player or something like that.
Still might. You still might.
I mean, I think he's become a very good player.
Yeah.
And I think it's frankly more impactful than what I would see RJ becoming. That's probably why we got less value for RJ, just purely him, than we did for Porzingis. So I think he can become a good player. But I also think for Knicks fans, we haven't been used to having a lot of good young players, right? So we never see that happen. We never see, everyone, we wanted it really to work out for Frank here, but he left and he didn't become much, right? And this is the tweet you see from Knicks fans always, like, who's left here and become some great player? I think someone said no one's left and become an all-star. And I looked up Rod Strickland, and it's weird because Strickland actually did make second team All-NBA.
Yeah, but he wasn't an all-star, right?
Yeah. I wonder how many players there are like that, actually.
Siakam did that a couple years ago.
Yeah, so that's not to knock RJ. I'm really look, and it's worth mentioning, right? At a time that was the low point of the franchise, he was very excited to be a Knick. Mm-hmm. Became here, he embraced that. He, for all the warts and for all the talent that the Knicks did end up adding around him, he was, like Tip said it, him and Quickley helped build this thing. That camp and RJ was absolutely. That? Yeah, that's what he said. They helped build this thing. I believe that was the exact.
Fuck Tibbs, fucking loser.
But he was a cornerstone, right? That COVID year, probably they don't make the playoffs. They definitely don't make the playoffs if it wasn't for him shooting really well from three, being a good co-lieutenant with Randall, despite frankly having to play with a point guard who couldn't shoot the ball at all, and a rim-bound center. And he has some talent as a passer. Like, it's the reads we want him to get better at, but he's probably the best at throwing that lob pass to Mitch. This is a guy who I think can and will contribute to winning basketball. I just don't see this upper echelon star for the people who are really hand-wring about losing RJ Barrett or not prioritizing him. It's like, this is a guy who will be a good player. Certainly not a bust for sure at the third pick. I think he'll be a more efficient player, but ultimately, I don't think when you get OG Anunoby, this is a guy who's going to be a guy you're looking back in 3 years and like, man, we really screwed up losing.
He's not a bust. He is a disappointment. Because look, let's be real. When you pick somebody third overall, you're hoping for multiple. Jordan. Yeah, Michael Jordan. But you're hoping for like a multiple all-star, a guy that is a high impact player for your franchise, a cornerstone, like you said. And I think what's frustrating is Porzingis clearly was that in New York. Circumstances dictated he had to go.
The injury changed everything, and he's 7'3". Like that. Yeah, all the bad feelings aside, that is why the trade happened. Period.
Yeah. So that was a different thing. I think what's frustrating with RJ is you're like, man, he never really showed that. Like he never even flashed something of that ilk of like, yeah, his second year was good, but I mean, you remember like some of those stretches with KP where you were like, what the hell is this? Like, what is this guy? Like, what is he capable of? What are we watching here? We watch, like, it felt like you're watching the future of basketball sometimes, right? When you were watching Porzingis, when he was going really well. And with RJ, you're just like, you're always kind of like, okay, well, he can be solid, but can he be anything more? And it's just increasingly became more difficult to see it after his second year, really. Like, I just didn't really see it as often. And honestly, by the end of his fourth year, so prior to this season, I was kind of just like ready to, not like, oh, they have to trade him, but definitely on the lookout. Definitely on the lookout to see if you can get somebody that you can bring in right now and improve your roster. And I think it like is worth mentioning. Part of the reason why this trade hits home and was like emotional in such a way that I think obviously they've made trades prior to this, right? They made the Josh Hart trade, they made the Derrick Rose trade, they traded for Cam Reddish, and they included Cam Reddish in the Josh Hart trade. So they've made trades. It's not like they haven't made them. But this is the first trade that very much felt like the NBA is a business. Like that's what a lot of this motivation was, right? Because if you want to get down to like the cold, hard facts of it, RJ Barrett was a negative contract. And like Zach Lowe, you hinted at this earlier. Zach Lowe on his pod said that he had talked to multiple executives around the league that had referenced RJ Barrett as a toxic contract that was underwater, that you'd really just have to eat the contract. So that isn't great. He's on the hook for 4 years, $107 million. That extension just started this year. Emmanuel Quickley reportedly wants a contract starting at around $25 million a year.
I think the price went up. I don't think yesterday's price is today's price.
Yeah, but let's just say whatever. It's $25 million. that you're talking about now 2 guys at $50 million a year on your books. And to the point you were making earlier, you still don't have the big wing defender that you rightfully need or feel you need. You're staring down the pike at 2 extensions coming up potentially, one for Brunson and one for Julius Randle potentially, in a year's time. And on top of that, you want to keep Isaiah Hartenstein. You want to potentially extend Quentin Grimes. So there's a lot of stuff that's coming down the line monetarily. And can you afford to hold on to RJ Barrett's contract? Because who knows where this is going? Like I think there's a fear that it's like trying to catch a falling knife, right? Like, is this really going to stop here, or is this going to cut me if I try to catch it? So I think they were worried about him continuing to crater. And does this contract go from negative contract, but one we can attach quick to and get OG Anunoby
to albatross?
Yeah, to an albatross where quick's not enough. We need more. And then the point you made earlier of like, well, were they even going to pay Quick what he wanted? Which apparently not. So at that point, like, you're making a choice based on the money. And yeah, of course, OG Anunoby is going to get a big contract. We all know it. But they do have a little bit more flexibility now, because they're going to have that RJ Barrett money off. It's off the books. And, they're not going to pay Quick. They're going to pay OG Anunoby instead. It'll be more, but it's kind of a similar salary slot. And now you probably can much easier retain Hartenstein, and you're not going to be threatening to push into the tax. And that's valuable. So I just think this was like, it hit home because, yeah, like these kids, like RJ and Quick, like they did help, like how much each did in terms of heavy lifting of helping turn things around. They were part of it. And they were the young guys that, like, when you're rebuilding from whatever the fuck the Knicks were, you put your hope and your like faith as a fan in the young players. And
I believe the children are the future.
Yes. And even like, look, RJ, I'm completely honest, like I just really soured on him a ton over the last year or so.
Really? I didn't notice.
But like Quick was like pretty special to me as a fan because he's really the first draft pick that you can say confidently, like, that we really properly got value on, in the sense of like, you found him late in the draft. We were ridiculed for taking him in the first round. He got better at everything. He got better at literally everything that you would have hoped, that everything that was a deficiency, he worked at and has improved at, and he's basically one of the better guys in the league. I mean, Sam Vecini had some really cool stats on his kind of like overall scoring profile in the league. I think last year he was like one of 8 guards to shoot 60, 40, 37, or whatever the hell it was. Like, and 60 being 60 at the rim, 40 or 50. I think it was 50 plus from mid range, and then 35 plus or something from 3. He's like one of 8 guards to do that in the league last year. His rim finishing has dropped off a little bit this year, but his mid-range has gotten better. Either way, the point is his scoring profile as a guard is now diverse, which was not the case at all when he was a rookie, where it was mostly like either he'd get to the line or feast or famine from 3, and that was that. And he's become an incredible team defender. I mean, go back. I mean, that Oklahoma City game, which was his penultimate game as a Knick, that's one of the, like, it was like a stunning defensive performance that he put on top of being absolutely on fire from 3 in that game. And then, you talk about just his ability to get to the rim now at a level he never did before. But like, you're talking about a kid that he exceeded any and all expectations that you would have for the 25th pick overall. And so those are the guys. And like, he played with like real kind of charisma and, bravado in a lot of ways. Like, he excited the Garden crowd and put on a show, and he's like prancing around and he's celebrating with fans and stuff like that's really cool. Like, he had that one a couple weeks ago, right, against the Nets, where he's like celebrating with Spike Lee after he hits that 3. And guys like that are hard workers and that are great teammates and that we've talked about this playing on here. This is a guy who, like, every year his role was different and he wasn't prioritized, and he kind of was like cast aside at various points for other new toys or whatever. And he always found a way to just like keep earning minutes and being like a pest and just having to be in the rotation because he was that good. And it just sucks because you want guys like that to be lifers, like you want those guys to stick around because they did help build this thing up. And I think very much him, like in terms of like when you're talking about establishing a culture, building a culture, like what are you as a team? I think he represented so much of like what any fan would want their team's culture to be. And so like losing him in that trade sucks and it hurts, but it's also part of like, again, this is like the first moment in their tenure where I think a trade in a large part, yes, of course they wanted Anunoby, but I don't think you can not look at kind of the business of basketball element of all of this. And this goes for Quick too. Like it's possible Quick wanted out because he's like, look, I'm never going to start here. I want a chance to start. I want a bigger role. And the way you're using me,
there's a difference between starting at the 1 and starting at the 2. I want to be the guy, or I want to show that I can be the guy, or next to a big wing. But like, even if they gave him 30 minutes starting at the 2, he might have felt like, yeah, you're paying me as your third option. There might be a team that'll pay me as their second option, or their starting point guard, or their lead ball handler, right? Like, and there are, and like that was probably then the Knicks have to make that choice. Like, is it worth overpaying for what we might be able to do with that role and maybe not get what we really need from the wing spot, or is it worth and look, I think they traded for a free agent, yes, but they traded a free agent who it looks like they weren't going to sign, or if they did, it'd create other issues. So I think, and I don't think Quickley will have any animosity. I mean, I'm sure when he comes back to the Garden, he's going to want to show out, but he wants to show out every game, right? That's Quickley. I'm sure RJ will too. I don't think either of them are leaving on any kind of bad terms with the front office. I think everyone understands it's a business. But I do think like it's just people did talk about this, the size and versatility, right? And that's what's really exciting. I'm going to keep harping on this, but like the things you can do with OG and the lineup flexibility, and that's why we have a coach that needs to lean into lineup flexibility. And to some extent, he did yesterday, right? He was more frequent with the subs. That could be an effect of being shorthanded. I'm very curious because those are the kinds of, even when they get a star, right? You still need that ace in your hold. That you need to be able to play that chess match. And the Knicks haven't had all the pieces to be able to do that, right? But even going back to the Miami series last year, right? Do they have a problem closing? And defense wasn't really the reason they lost that, but they did give up a lot of threes. And do you have, if Hart is not on Jimmy Butler, but if he's closing out, if you have a guy like DiVincenzo, if Grimes is maybe able to stay on Lowry or on Gabe Vincent instead of having to guard Jimmy when he's in, OG allows you to really mix your things up. It's like having an elite safety cornerback type guy, right? A guy who can just you can move them all around the field and allow your other guys to and be unpredictable.
Like having like a good linebacker.
Or any linebacker. But or having an offense that doesn't just run the same play. That's disgusting, man.
Spam like three guys the entire game. And it's like Goddard's like barely getting like the spam treatment. He's just like there.
No, it's. I mean, the offense is broken. They scored 31 points because AJ is just that good, and Jalen is just pretty damn good.
Yeah, I watched a video on it, and it was like this guy was just like, "Dude, this offense they're running is like a fucking high school offense right now."
It's insane. It's like a little kid who just started learning to play Madden. It's like when you first started learning Madden, you're like, "I'm gonna go 4 verts every time, and I'm gonna run engage 8 every time on defense."
Engage 8, great play. That's a really good play. The Bob.
Field goal block, right? That's what I always used to do against like the computer on rookie mode when they're going on 4th and 1, just run field goal block. So he gives you so much flexibility, and their 2 best players don't, frankly, right? Brunson is strictly a 1 position player. Randall he's kind of his own thing, but he can't really play the 5 unless you pair him with a great defender. Grimes, can play up. I wish Tibbs played him up more, but he's ideally a 2. Hart is, is more versatile. He's, he can guard multiple positions, but he doesn't have the spacing to play the 2, so he's kind of just a 3. Like you have all of these kind of this versatility that's added, and that's something that for all the great things that Quickley did, and for all the things he'd clean up on defense, the impact he had. Ideally, he is a lead guard. He is a point guard playing next to. He's the smallest guy on the floor, and that's where I think his impact can be even higher, and where he'll command that kind of salary. But for this team, and they have now the size and the kind of the firepower, frankly, to go up against a team like Milwaukee and Boston, and to get that offensive spark off the bench and floor spacer. I think those are things that they can get for what'll end up being cheaper than the Quickley contract.
Yeah, and
it puts this year into play in a way that it frankly wasn't. Right, the Knicks were stuck. If you could talk about the money about next year, to your point, this team is a real contender, and.
Well, they have
and that starting lineup is going to play more in the playoffs, right? So as much as the bench hurts, that is a lesser consideration in the playoffs. Yeah. And you have a guy he's been proven to be able to shoot in the playoffs. That raises their ceiling this year, and Brunson, the clock is ticking even this season, right? Brunson has one more year under this contract. He's going to get paid. Randall, I believe, can opt out after next year, or Randall will be up for extension this summer. Or
yeah, he's extension eligible this summer.
Yeah, so those guys are getting paid. And so if you want to see how far you can go with them, that clock is ticking, right? We have Brunson on the best contract in the NBA. It's not going to last. So every season counts, including this one. And if you have a chance we can debate how much the bench hurts. I think that in the playoffs, this is a better team for sure than it was. And I just because of how much OG brings and how many holes and how much of a catalyst that is to what others can actually do.
Yeah, and I think to your point about that is a good point. That it did feel like, and that's why I was kind of the entire year I was like, I just don't know that they are gonna make a move, because I'm gonna be quite honest. When I heard Zach Lowe say that there were executives around the league calling this toxic contract, I have felt that way for a while. There was that brief glimmer of hope at the start of the year where he's on fire from 3, and you're like, all right, maybe he's going to come through, or at the very least, he keeps us up, we'll be able to trade him for value. I was pretty worried after last season, and I was very worried over this past month of who the fuck would even want this contract? This guy is doing nothing for you out there. And then you have the Quickley thing where you're like, okay, well, you can trade him because you didn't extend him, but what are you so you're attaching him to RJ, and for what? What's out there? You're trading him. I remember I did this exercise earlier this year where I was attach Quickley to his number to Fournier's number and look at the guys that are available. Who do you think Toronto is going to or who do you think who would you trade for? And most people were Anunoby. And in my head, I'm like, Toronto's not going to do Fournier and Quick for Anunoby. I mean, they probably would have now, based on what we know. They probably would have been glad to do that one instead of the RJ thing, unless they really value RJ, which I have a hard time believing. But I mean, honestly, I think this trade basically boils down to Quick for OG and the Knicks paying that second rounder to dump as a sweetener to dump the RJ deal. That's more or less how I view this deal now. And to go back to your point, the Knicks do have more flexibility now because they actually have to go get somebody. They have to go, they probably need to bolster their depth after trading Quickley out. So you now have the option of you have the Fournier contract, you have all your picks. Potentially you have Grimes if you wanted to. You could theoretically trade DiVincenzo. I don't think they're going to do that. You could trade Mitch. You could trade Hartenstein. I don't think they're going to do any of that stuff. But they have kind of they've given themselves now an opportunity to reimagine the roster, which didn't exist before this trade. Because before this trade, you're just well, what the fuck? This is just what it is. And I personally wasn't that upset about that. I was okay with playing out the year for how it was. But not only do I think they have the opportunity now to make further moves, I think they have to. You can't make this trade and just sit. You know what I mean? Like there are going to be like if your bench is weak, you have the opportunity to change that. So be aggressive about it. I'm not saying like throw all the picks on the table and go get Donovan Mitchell. I don't think that's the only way to make a move, but you have to make a move. And I expect them to. I don't think that's like something they're going to sit around and wait on. But look, I think the front office, like, say whatever you want about Leon and whatever, but like, just think about what this roster was when they inherited it and the talent level it's at now. And then on top of that, like, no front office, certainly not them, nails every move they make. And, if I give them truth serum, I'd love to find out if they would rather have Jalen Williams than, the 3 protected picks that they got instead. But like, I like that they don't sit around, feeling sorry for themselves all the while. All the while a great win carries them. But like, they don't sit around like, oh my God, this RJ deal, I guess we just have to wait until it's done. Like they are shaking the trees and seeing what's out there and seeing what options they can possibly have available. What's this guy worth? What's that guy worth? We know that they were at least gauging Quickley's trade value going back to the start of last season. So I don't know that this is the case, but like maybe doing that background work, being diligent about it, is what enabled them to kind of like know this type of trade was out there. And I think they've also
I'm sure they're doing that kind of. You have to be aware of the market for all your guys, right? You're not doing your job if you're not. So,
and the big thing is like, I think they deserve a lot of credit. One, I mean, there was a report that came out after this of like other teams were shocked that like Toronto didn't wait till the deadline because they thought they would get more lucrative offers than what they did. So one, I think that tells me that Toronto really wanted Quickley, as that's a player they targeted as like, he makes sense for us. And two, the fact that this stayed as quiet as it did, I mean, there was literally no reporting on this at all. Like, I mean, we knew that the Knicks had interest in Anunoby, and we also knew that they had talks had previously centered around RJ Barrett as a centerpiece of the deal. So for them anyway, they tried to sell them on RJ Barrett centered packages. So, but like, we didn't know this was coming at all. I mean, I was fucking shocked when I saw that when it came across my screen or my phone on Saturday. But like, the fact that they've kept these trades in general when they do them under wraps, I think is a good thing. And they continue to not be perfect, but they do continue to find ways to pivot when they have mistakes or when things pop up, and they deserve credit for that, because I think that's as important as nailing the original decision, right? Is okay, well, you didn't nail it, so how do you move, how do you change that? And again, not everything is perfect, but it's really hard to say that they've done anything but a good job. Leon and Wes and these guys. And look, I'm sure that this was not an easy trade to make for them. Like, I know that there are people that would have done this in a heartbeat, but I don't think this is an easy trade for them. And whatever the limitations of Quickley's role in New York, I don't think this says they didn't value him. Like, they didn't trade him for just shit, right? They traded him for a guy that they really wanted. So I don't think this indicates that they didn't value him. Maybe they didn't value. I agree with what kind of Prez talked about in his piece of like, yeah, don't tell me that they maximize the asset. I agree with that. And I don't think they valued him necessarily appropriately in their roster building decisions, or obviously at the coaching staff level, just in terms of assigning him playing time consistently. But they did value him in a way that I think shows a level of respect for him as a player and for what he provided while he was here. And quite honestly, what his potential upside is moving forward.
Yeah, and they sent him to, they didn't send him to be another backup. They sent him to a pretty ideal fit. And they also didn't send him to a place where the expectation was that he would immediately be a star, which, as good as he is and might think he is, it's probably, I know you love to clown Scotty Barnes, but that is a pretty good front court mate for who can do some ball handling himself.
A mate, eh?
A mate. Well, did you see I think it must be a Fred Katz typo, but he was like, he asked like OG about the trade rumors. He's like, I don't worry about all that. I let me agents handle that.
Yeah. I was laughing so hard at that.
The comments are great. Everyone's just like, I hope he actually talks like a pirate. But they sent RJ home, right? I think that say what you want about an Asian as they have generally sent guys in trades. Like Portland was a good opportunity for Cam to really get some minutes.
And Obi wanted to go to Indiana.
Oh, that is a perfect fit, right? They sent him to, and that's something where they could have easily said, no, they are an up and coming team. They're a rival. We would rather send you to fucking San Antonio. They didn't, right?
Or they could have been like, fuck you, we're keeping you.
Yeah, and there's probably something to be said that there's going to be more interest from teams that see a very good role for those guys. But I think they deserve credit for that. They've generally been good about that. So I think that all in all, and this is one of those trades that I think people are already calling it a win-win, right? And I think the Sabonis Halliburton trade still to this day, I think was a win-win. I think both teams benefited from that. Pacers were stuck with their front court, needed an injection of youth, dynamic playmaker reset, and the Kings needed someone to pair with one of their guards, and it happened to be that they stuck with Fox, who's also playing at an All-NBA level, right? So there are win-win trades. I think we forget about that a lot. Because this isn't the stock market where there's one measure of value, right? The basketball is a very complex and dynamic game. There are teams on which, like Toronto, Quickley might give you more than OG Anunoby gives you. And this is a team where I think, yeah, OG gives you more than either of those guys gave you, right? So and you can say, well, creation is paramount, so an aggregate maybe Quickley is the more valuable player, sure. But I think it's tough not to be excited after watching that first half. Like, we've seen the Knicks play really well against the Bucks.
Like, but it looked so different yesterday. The way they were playing looked.
They were imposing their will on, again, like you said, maybe the best team in the NBA. Right? I think the Bucks are the best team, but an elite team. They were imposing their will in a way that I haven't seen from them in a while. I think of that Clippers game a couple years back. I think of some performances I've seen here and there. I think about them beating Boston with Quickley as the backup, but and they made a ton of mistakes. I mean, they nearly punted away the game. And it just shows you how much higher the upside of this team is with that kind of a wing defender and shooter.
Yeah, and I mean, I think some of the comments that were made after the game by Brunson and Randall say something about kind of just, well, this is what Brunson. He just naturally plays hard on both sides of the ball. Brunson said when he sees something, he just attacks it. And then, Anunoby said stuff like, I was just reading my teammates, seeing if they pick the ball up or seeing where the help defense is coming from, reading my man as well, seeing if he turns his head. And then Randall had this to say about him. He called Anunoby the perfect piece. That's just who he is as a player. He just makes very solid, sound decisions, Randall said. He understands how to play well off of everybody. I think he's just a high IQ kind of basketball player. That's naturally who he is, and it fits right in for us. And then this is the last one. This is from Brunson. Plays really hard on both sides of the ball, and he's, I guess you can say, a perfect fit. But I think he's only going to get better with the more he knows the things that we do, and the more he understands our terminology on both sides of the ball and stuff like that. He can be very special here. I think I don't want to focus too much more on this, but I do think that says it does feel like I don't think they disliked RJ. I don't think they hated RJ. I do think they probably were getting very frustrated with RJ by the end of this time in New York. And all the stuff they're talking about and, his cutting and all these things, those are things that RJ just didn't do. And he wasn't providing, and he wasn't playing a very high IQ brand of basketball towards the end of his time here. And I think, you want to feel like when you're on the floor, the guys out there are kind of supporting you, like that you're a team, right? And Anunoby gives these guys, he covers for them and mitigates their weaknesses. And in turn, they mitigate some of his limitations too, right? He's not a good shot creator. He's not somebody who can put the ball on the deck and just get you buckets. But Brunson and Randall can. So now he can play off of that. And say whatever you want about Toronto, but like the last couple of years, they haven't had scorers with the gravity that Randall and Brunson do. I know Siakam is pretty good, but like just the overall kind of construction was very redundant. There were a lot of redundancies that they needed to get rid of there. And trading OG is definitely one of them. Although, bringing RJ there is so fucking weird. Like they're starting Barnes, RJ, Siakam, and Pirtle. Okay, but
that was.
yeah,
I mean, they still have Gary Trent Jr. right? So you'd think that he would be a better fit in that. It would make more sense to start him, right?
I'm guessing I could see him getting traded. I think Siakam is going to get traded. And to their credit, like, look, we've clowned Masai. I certainly have for a long time on here. But like one of the cool things about, and Lo mentioned this on his podcast too, but like it is rare you see a trade that's basically just players. Like it's not a lot of draft capital. It's just a player exchange. And thank God, dude, we got Precious Chua. He's so good. But
don't sleep on Malachi. Wow, you even mentioned Malachi Flynn.
Dante DiVincenzo's evil twin brother. But like what's cool is that I think for them now, for Toronto, it's like it's a lot easier to just trade Pascal Siakam now for picks. Because you're just like, okay, well, whatever. We got a young player we wanted in this other deal. Now we can focus on building up our draft capital, right? So Siakam trade, give us cap filler, give us draft capital, whatever they want to do. But like it's not totally dissimilar. It's a similar trade to what the Kings did with the Pacers, right? Where they were like, all right, we want Sabonis, we'll give you Halliburton. Obviously, look, if Quickley has a glow up like that in Toronto, I will be at the bottom of a bottle, is what I would be. But I do think it's a similar concept, right? Of the Knicks being like, okay, well, this guy's really good, but we have this dude, and we're not sure we want to pay both of them. So you have this guy that we love. How can we make this happen? And similar to that, Buddy Hield was kind of like the albatross contract the Kings wanted off of. RJ Barrett is that in this deal. And I think it's a similar trade. There were no draft picks in that trade, in the Halliburton trade. There's one draft pick here. Obviously, we gave up the Detroit second, but like it's very similar in concept. So we'll see how it turns out. Obviously, I do think like there is a version of this trade though where the Knicks look stupid because Quickley just becomes like that guy. And obviously, like, we talked about this forever, but the value of a guy like him and the way he plays is, one, he's a good defender. And then two, like, he is able to retain value playing off of and with other high usage guys. If he has to dial up his usage or dial down his usage, he is so versatile in that way. And it gives them a lot of freedom, like given, how Scotty's played so far this year in terms of like being able to be a playmaker at his size. With him and Quickley, like just given Quickley's skill set, it gives them a lot of kind of variety in terms of what types of players they want to target moving forward to build around those two.
Yeah, I will say this. I don't know that I think for Quickley to really hit that level, like a consistent all-star, all-NBA level, or be viewed that way, he'd have to be either a nuclear shooter or just like a maxi level speed demon, right?
I think the shooting's coming for him, man. I thought this year was like I was like, there are moments where I'm like, whoa, you're shooting.
Yeah, so if the guy starts taking 10 3-point attempts a game, shooting 40% with all his pull-ups, that's kind of the thing. That's what opened it up, frankly, for Halliburton, right? But Halliburton also is a great passer, a little more size of the rim. So I think that is still to me like a 95th, 99th percentile outcome. But I also think that the more reasonable outcome, and what I think if he hasn't already reached it, is a guy in the vein of Mike Conley or Kyle Lowry, right? So those guys, I've said this before, guys were
Mike Lowry.
Or Mike Lowry.
Mike Lowry.
I haven't watched that movie in forever.
Probably Mike Lowry.
Probably not in the last like 15 years. I think that's what, like, Lowry was always a guy, and so was Conley, was a top 25 to 30 guy, probably consensus view. But if you looked at advanced stats, they were often top 10, right? Truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Just the consensus, like people are always going to fall under guys like Westbrook or Morant, who are just freak athletes. And if you like, or a shooter like Dame or Steph, and the guys that can just do so much, I think guards are like that are undervalued on defense. If they can, we've seen Quickley is pretty underrated in terms of his strength, right? Like he's that switch on to Portis. I would be lying if I said that was the first time he's done something like that, right? Force that kind of elbow and really hold up. His lower body strength and his core strength are really underrated. But I see that more as the outcome. So it's like if we've helped our title chances now and lost the guy who might be Mike Conley in a couple years, but we have an all-star point guard, it mitigates, I think, that a little bit. I don't necessarily see like him becoming a perennial all-NBA player, which would make it really hard to stomach. But then look at that tier of guard. Would it have been crazy for a guy like Kyle Lowry to be traded for OG Anunoby, depending on his team? It wouldn't have been, right? So we should be clear that is still something we are projecting. I think it's an easy projection, but we haven't seen in the playoffs, and we haven't seen it in full starters minutes, always starting every night, beyond kind of the stretch last year. So with all that in mind, I think it was I think it's going to look good for both teams. I think Quickley's going to have a good career. I think RJ will rejuvenate a little bit, make this contract maybe not be quite worth his contract, but be a positive player. I'm
very pessimistic about RJ Barrett right now. Like, I think the situation too, like if he was getting traded to a team that at least you're like, okay, spacing isn't dog shit. Like, they're committed to Scotty, right? So Scotty's like their guy. Obviously, like Quick's another guy. And then I'm like, okay, well, we just did this, right? We talked about me and you. We've been talking about this. You talked about this for a while the other day, where you're like, before he even got traded. It's actually really funny. Like the night before he got traded, that was that Orlando game. Like basically, that was, I don't know why, but that was like the tipping point for, it felt like everybody. Where we're just like, dude, we can't do this. Like either he's got to be traded, he's got to sit, but like this can't go on like this. But you had mentioned
they're a team full of the type of wings, in particular Franz Wagner, who show you like what you really want out of that position, right?
Yeah. And so like I just remember like you mentioning this kind of like not even just that night, but like kind of the days leading up to the trade. You're just like, well, like the basic thing is like, what does he do well that complements Brunson and Randall? And I'm not saying Quickley is Brunson. I'm not saying Scotty Barnes is Randall, right? Or that Siakam is Randall necessarily. But like the concern is still the same, where you're like, okay, well, what do you do to actually complement these guys?
You do here.
Yeah. But it's especially with Barnes and Siakam, you're like, well, how do you complement these guys? And I don't see it. And like, look, Siakam, maybe he's not going to be there for that long. That's cool. But like Barnes is like their fucking centerpiece, right? And I just don't know how that changes unless he makes a serious shooting leap. And I just don't know what the evidence is of it. Like, why can't, because he can't, it's not like he's a guy, there are times like Quickley's a guy, right? Where sometimes his catch and shoot numbers are lower than his pull-up shooting numbers. So like he might be somebody who catches a rhythm by like dribbling into a three. RJ can't shoot off the dribble. So to me, I don't want to hear about like, well, what do you expect him to do when he's just standing in the corner? I'm like, I don't know.
Fucking if you give him the ball, you forget. Yeah, he can't like the mid-range pull-up hasn't come along. He's developed that floater, which I think has been important and was a key to his success. But if people are saying give RJ the keys and make Brunson a shooting guard, that's his true position. And it's like, well, yeah, RJ has to be able to do more than just attack on layups, because you're going to be asking him to create from the center of the floor. Those like straight line drives are kind of the pistol stuff and all of that. You can't build the whole plane out of that. You need to be able to attack from the middle of the floor. Even Quickley struggles with that, and he has a pull-up game. And if RJ was some elite Ja Morant level finisher or rim guy, we might be able to have that conversation. But even Ja like takes floaters. He's not particularly efficient at them, but he's a better mid-range option than RJ.
And he just plays with way more for it. He commands so much more attention because of how fast he can collapse the paint.
Yeah. So it's just, so he's going to have to, I mean, there have been, and he's not the first, but wings like that who dominate high school go to blue blood programs. We've seen this. We've seen Andrew Wiggins. We've seen Harrison Barnes, Otto Porter Jr., right? 3rd overall pick in the draft. He wasn't some nuclear shooter. I mean, he wasn't the kind of shooter he's known as now, right? Or certainly when he was just people loved him for his size and versatility as a forward, as a ball handler. And he found out that was going to cut it, and he had to reinvent himself, and he got a big contract. And at times it looked like Washington might have overpaid, but they had to keep him. I mean, that was that Arenas team, right? Who was on that Washington? It was Wall and
that was Wall and Beal.
Yeah. So, and they had to keep him next to Wall and Beal, but he had to reinvent himself, and he became a really good shooter. And maybe RJ won't be that good as a shooter, but he still has more just become a good catch and shoot guy. Continue to find ways to the rim and get to the line. And then just be the guy who can make the right reads, just the simple reads. I don't know that I'll ever love him as a defender, but I think he's already a solid one, adding a little more in defensive glass. And you have a pretty nice player there. And that's why I'm probably not as pessimistic as you. I do think right now, though, going right from New York to now again playing next to it, Brunson was not the problem, frankly. I think Brunson actually helped him.
If Brunson didn't help him, then that's his problem. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't really give a shit.
Brunson helped him in the sense that your best option against Brunson is your long wings, right?
Right.
So that, I don't want to take away credit from RJ, but he had his most success when Lowry was matched up on him, or they put Gabe Vincent on him, or in the previous series they put Garland on him. The last 3 games, Brunson went off because they were like, "We'll live with Vincent," and RJ deserves credit because he showed them that you can't just stick one of them on RJ. But once they did put a wing on RJ, the results weren't as great, and of course that wing was Jimmy Butler, who was an elite defender. And we saw against Orlando, right? When the other team has the kind of guard like Suggs who can cause problems for Brunson, then they don't have to do that. So I do think a guy like Brunson can help him though, in that sense. So it was really, the problem was always the Randall RJ fit, right? Randall likes to operate from the paint. You want to surround him with guys who can shoot. And you can say whether that's frankly, Randall has shown a lot more to that end, right? If you want to say, well, why not surround RJ with guys who can shoot? He hasn't, we talk about Randall's reads and all of that. He's much better passing out of drives. He's much better passing out of you in double teams than RJ. And he's able to, because he's bigger and stronger too. It's not just the kind of reads. So playing next to, I think Scottie is in many ways a better. He's a much better facilitator than Randall. His shooting has come around, although I don't think he's ever a guy you really want just spacing. He's a really good transition player. So in that sense, he might not be as bad a fit, but in the half court, I don't love that fit. And I would have liked him, if RJ went to a place like Indiana, he really complements them, right? He goes to a place like even San Antonio, right? Maybe, he's playing with the stretch 5 there. This is probably not the greatest fit, but they're probably aware of his flaws. He is playing on a team with more ball movement, if we're spacing. And that maybe gets him to kind of embrace maybe some of the things that we wanted him to, and to play more of that role. But I think the expectation that, he needs to be at a place where he's just going to cook, it's not in the cards unless he improves his pull-up game. Or becomes, again, like Ben Simmons as a passer.
Yeah. That's what it is. I just feel like this is not a great situation for him. And to me, he's a guy like maybe when he's like 25, 26, gets to his 3rd team, another team. I don't know who the team is, but like another team, maybe the light goes off for him. And
eventually everyone improves. Ricky Rubio improved as a shooter, right? Rajon Rondo improved as a shooter. Eventually the reps just accumulate over time. So I think he will be eventually a 36% shooter. It was a question of when.
And the Knicks don't. They're like at a certain point in team building. I think this is like where we can wrap up. But like another, like this trade was hard because it's a trade that signifies internally, at least, the Knicks believe they're at a different stage of team building. Like they are not now totally about like, no, this guy has so much potential and upside. Like we can't trade him. We have to explore. Like they are at a different stage. They are effectively planting their flag, as I see it, saying, no, we believe prioritizing what is best complementary around Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle is worth exploring and committing to. And a guy like OG Anunoby probably doesn't have the ceiling potential that Immanuel Quickley does, but you know what you're getting. You know exactly what you're getting. And this signifies a change from them being like, oh, risk averse, like we're just trying to like establish a floor and we're just making sure that we build a culture and all that stuff. No, this is a move that is about like they are trying to step up to the big boy table now. And that aggression, I'm assuming, in terms of acquiring talent and looking for immediate upgrades to compete as best as you can now and moving forward and whatever, will continue. And
I think that was part of what made the trade feel surreal. Is it was a change. The era changed on December 30th, right? Like, when Tibbs got here, it was very much this team bottomed out. This is, and we're just trying to get any kind of momentum going, right? Then they had some success in the last couple of years. It's been all right. Let's keep building out this roster, keep developing the young guys. But it was always qualified with the Knicks aren't going to win a championship this year. The Knicks aren't contending. That's not the goal, right? If that's your goal, then your expectations are too high. That changed on December 30th. And as a Knicks fan, that really hasn't been our mindset since maybe 2012, 2013, because we had Melo, and you always know, like, when you have a guy like that, that needs to be the goal. That was, I think, what made it feel so surreal. And it was exciting and a little bit like, oh, like I'm saying goodbye to a friend in a weird way, right? Because it frankly, like last year, especially after winning the Cavs series, like Dallas talked about this, like there is something kind of liberating about playing with house money and just like, yeah, we're not Lakers fans who have or Celtics fans who like always have the weight of judging every game about how it's going to look. If it means they can contend for a title, we're having fun. Like they're exceeding expectations. That now there are expectations, and that just changed, and it is exciting because that was ultimately we knew it was going to happen. But it comes with it's a change, and people take a little bit of time to get used to change. But it's exciting, and we'll see what happens going forward.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting time, and like to your point, it's like a mental shift as a fan too, where you're like, wait, what are we doing now? We're trying to win ball games. This is
no, we've been trying to win ball games, and the difference is we're trying to win.
Yeah, but it's a more serious level, right? It's like it's kind of like saying like making the second round will be cool, but like we are trying to really push the envelope here. We believe we're closer than. I think it's safe to say the Knicks believe they're closer than the general consensus is, which we'll see. I mean, I think that's a bet that's heavily predicated on Julius Randle establishing himself as a genuine playoff performer, which is a big bet to make. But we'll see how it happens. And I'm excited to like just see how they manage this. It'll be, again, they're playing at a different table now, and the moves will be judged in a different vein and accordingly. All right. I think that's a good place to end it. Stacy, let the people know where they can find you and plug anything that you'd like to plug.
You can find me at StacyPatton89. We'll be doing. I'm planning to do another strictly NFL podcast. We missed the first one. We did a preview of the college football playoff semifinals, which, if you didn't watch, Michigan made the final, and so we'll be doing another preview about Michigan being in the final. Did I mention that Michigan's in the final and beat Alabama, and they beat Nick Saban? Or if you hadn't heard about that, I would go check it out.
Yeah, that's for sure. Let's go blue. Fuck Alabama, and I hope Ohio State has a really good time watching us play the national championship game. I'm sure that their fans will have fun with that. I have nothing to plug personally, so I will also I'll just plug all of work Strickland, Strictly NFL. Check out Takes from Obvious Bozos, all the different podcasts we have. Everybody's doing great work. I'll also plug the fact that the Bills will be eating dolphin in Miami this Sunday and take back our crown as the AFC East champions. And I will say, I'm sad to see Emmanuel Quickley go. I'm sad to see RJ Barrett go, but excited to see what's next for the Knicks. So, all right, that is our show for today. I hope everybody has a great rest of the week.
Oh, Happy New Year, everyone. Sorry.
Yes, and a Happy New Year to everybody. And I will see you on Friday.